think get started? Yeah, awesome. So thanks everyone for joining and for working through the technical issues that we had there with the Zoom call and switching over here to Teams. I'm at fault for switching over because I locked out Kim's account trying to get logged in to get this thing started. So I'm sorry, but y'all are here, so that's great. So yeah, thanks for joining and for inviting me in. I'm looking forward to discussing. I've got some slides to walk through, but I wanted to make sure that we have lots of time for questions at the end. And I will say that I blocked off some time after the official end of this call. So if we do go right up to the end, I can stick around for extra questions. I'd ask that you either raise your hand using the Teams chat feature or the Teams feature, or throw your question in chat, and then I'll try to either respond to it in line, or I'll go back and review the questions at the end of the call, and we can go from there. Cool. So I guess to get started, who the heck am I and why was I asked to come talk? So my name is Matt Van Duinen. I'm Sustainability Director with WAP Sustainability Consulting. I've been working in sustainability in one way, shape, or form since I graduated college back in 2010. Started off doing life cycle assessment consulting for a company that's now Sphera, but it's gone through a couple changes. Then I went to go work for Shaw Floors in manufacturing. I'm sure some of you are aware of Shaw Contract or Patcraft Flooring. That's all Shaw brands. So I was one of their product sustainability managers over there, dealing with all this same type of stuff. Left there about 6 years ago to join a couple guys with WAP. And now we've grown our business from the three of us back then to as of a week from now, I think it'll be 19, which is insane growth for a small business like ours. But what's cool about that is we've definitely made some waves in the industry, and we've gotten some good connections that I'll show you here in a little bit. But it's been a fun group to work with, and learning about all the sustainability stuff. There's my family over on the right that I want to throw in that picture to kind of give a good reason for why I do this. With sustainability, a lot of times, unfortunately, it's not the easy option. So a lot of people or a lot of people that work in this space or are specifying the products likely have a reason to do so. For me, it's my family. I want to make sure that this earth is still around and good to go for my kids, for their kids, and so on. So I wanted to include that to kind of set the stage of why I even do this. It's fun working with clients who care and who really want to or I was about to say make an impact, but it's the exact opposite, to reduce their impact, and want to do that. I'm now in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but if you guessed from my last name, I am from West Michigan. I grew up in Hudsonville, good old Dutch name. And actually, I have some family on the call who put me in touch with Kim. So I'll save them the embarrassment, so and won't do that. But yeah, I will say that I did contact their parents to get a good picture to include in the presentation and decided not to. So I'm very lucky there. But my role within WAP, I do a lot of the technical work. I do a lot to help companies prepare documentation, to verify documentation. I do a lot of the nitty-gritty details. So I've tried to keep this presentation a little more high level to give a good overview of the space, as well as your role as designers within this space, either now or in the future when you start with your careers. But if you have questions and want to dive in deep, let me know. I've got my contact info at the end of the presentation. feel free to reach out or ask on this call. Happy to dive in. I can talk for days about all this stuff. So there's a lot to it. So WP sustainability directly, we have many, 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 many different roles that we play. Our goal in this space is to be a one-stop shop for companies. We traditionally have worked with manufacturers, a lot of which are building product manufacturers. So we want to be that one-stop shop. We want to be the group that understands the environmental impact, talking life cycle assessment of our environmental product declarations. We want to be able to understand the material health impact, declare labels, HPDs. We'll dive into that a little bit. All the different certifications that they can achieve. The idea there is to when we get in and start working with a company, they have a clear need, something that they want to achieve, and we'll circle up on some of those drivers here in a second. But a lot of times they don't know this space, so we can come in and we can talk to them and engage with them and inform them of the other things that they can do, the other certifications they can achieve, the other things that they should be considering, which is really rewarding for me and working with WAP as opposed to my LCA consulting background, because we are multifaceted. Sustainability is such a wide space that whenever someone comes to me who learns what I do and they're like, okay, so what's a sustainable product? First off, that's a dumb question. Don't ask it again. But what does sustainability mean to you? And that's where the conversation tends to start, because sustainability could mean low carbon. It could mean recyclable. It could mean using recycled content. It could mean bio-based. It could mean so many different things, that understanding the goals for the person asking the question really helps me to have that conversation around material choice, around what certifications to look into, what documents to create to eventually come up with something they can talk about. So that previous slide was a lot of specific name recognition things, but it kind of boils down to, like, as I said, our approach is really to come in and be that managed service for these companies, really falling into these four primary buckets: healthy materials, life cycle assessment or environmental impact, ESG support, that's environmental and social governance, and then carbon management, talking greenhouse gas inventories and things like that. We also have the ability to do a couple other things for our clients on the right, but I wear a lot of hats is the gist of it, and well versed across the board here, so able to help answer questions as they come up. So to dive in to what we're going to talk about today, I put this slide up here because as designers, you're going to be working with spaces. Like I put buildings up here, but you're going to be helping design spaces or design products. And at the very fundamental level, what are buildings? And that can be answered in so many different ways that I'm not going to like pose the question to y'all. But the one thing to remember is that it is what we have here, a curated assembly of materials and ingredients. So essentially, like trying to eat the elephant in one go is not going to happen. But you start to boil it down to discrete materials. Every material used, there's a choice. And as designers, as product designers, as interior designers, you have the ability to decide what materials to use. And incorporating things like sustainability, environmental impact, material health impact, and whatever it might be, you have that ability to include that in your specifications, in your choice matrix, if you were. So these materials and ingredients each have an impact on the climate and an impact on health, and that's something that we need to recognize. Even the greenest of green products, whatever that is, still has an impact. like the thing that we always would joke about when I worked for Shaw is we would sit back and brainstorm every once in a while about like what could we do to make the greenest product, or what is the greenest flooring product? None. Like no flooring is the greenest option. And as a flooring company, yeah, that doesn't quite work. Um, and as designers, that doesn't quite work there either. Like you need to choose something, right? Like so you have your constraints to say, okay, I need a floor, or I need a floor that's going to hold up to water in bathrooms. I need a floor that's going to have sound abatement, so talking carpets, whatever it might be. Once you have that constraint, there's a lot of wiggle room that you have within there. And so knowing that there are impacts associated with these materials going in can help you specify these products, these materials at the front end, so that way you're intentionally designing the products or and buildings spaces. So today I'm gonna focus on two primary aspects here, and this is carbon, greenhouse gas inventories, global warming, however you want to put it, and then material health. So to set the stage of why we should even be caring about buildings, about carbon within buildings, I want to throw this slide up here because this graph up here, because this really shows right away that buildings are a huge, huge component of the global CO2 emissions. About 40% is what we're showing here for 2019. And that can kind of be divided into operational carbon, so different energy use within the building, heating, cooling, all the other electrical components and different pieces that are going in there. And then embodied carbon. And embodied carbon is something that we'll focus on, because operational carbon, the strategies to reduce that impact are very well known, right? Like you can Energy Star appliances, LED lights, lighting controls, different things like that. But even then, you're very limited in the material choices there, because nothing within operational carbon, well, very minimal within operational carbon deals with carpet, like maybe some cleaning stuff. None of it deals with the structural steel that's used to create the building. And that's where the embodied carbon comes into play. So when it comes to reducing that impact, that's not really known right now, or at least it hasn't been known to a lot of designers. And there are some things that are coming on board now that are really helpful there. But embodied carbon is this big, huge unknown. We know that it's an issue, but the designers don't always have the right tools to be able to do anything about it. So to really quickly dive into this embodied carbon, in order to have that embodied carbon number, you need to start with what's called a life cycle assessment. And then those results get disclosed via an environmental product declaration. And that's key to know, because you'll hear as you get into the industry, you'll hear this embodied carbon or net zero carbon or different things thrown around a lot. And you'll hear it enough that you'll just think that this is commonplace, that everyone has this information, everyone knows what's going on. It's not true. I can tell you, I've got so many clients coming to us day in, day out saying, hey, we're being asked for our embodied carbon numbers. We have no idea where to even start. You start with an LCA, you start with an EPD. So to level set on what an LCA even is life cycle assessment at the highest level is an environmental impact analysis at every life cycle stage of a product. So we're talking like the raw material extraction, manufacturing, any waste that comes off in manufacturing, all the way through to transport, install, use, end of life, reuse if possible. But at every stage, there are energy requirements, there are material requirements, There are emissions to air, emissions to water, whatever it might be. We modeled this all out, and we come up with some final set of results that includes global warming potential, which if we just focus in on raw materials and manufacturing, becomes our embodied carbon. So in this graph here, it's only 1 and 2 that become the embodied carbon. So it's the amount, the equivalent global warming potential that a global warming potential impact that comes from the creation of that product. And that's key to know because the rest of that impact, the rest of the product's life cycle impact aren't tracked within embodied carbon. In some cases, it's a really small amount where you have, say, a desk or a table that gets installed. It's there, like that's it. But I have a sit-stand desk here that I just raised a little bit earlier that's motorized. And so that has a use phase impact to raise and lower it. So knowing some of those potential future life cycle stage impacts is really helpful. And that's where those impacts will be divulged within an environmental product declaration or an EPD. I think some examples of 2 different EPDs that we've worked on, just so you can see what they look like. These are the cover pages. These are essentially summary documents of a life cycle assessment. An LCA report tends to be 50, 100, 150 page document, super detailed, super involved in all the background assumptions and details that the verifier needs to know in order to ensure that the assessment was done accurately. But it's a lot of details that honestly it can get boring. I do all the quality checks internally, so I read them day in day out. But many of our clients skip the LCA because they have the EPD, and the EPD is a summary of that document. It's not only is it a summary, but it's created in a consistent way according to what we call a product category rules. So within that PCR, the product category rules, it states what you need to include on the final EPD. So anything within that product category is going to be showing the same information. It may look a little different, but it'll still show the same information. As an example here, these are 2 different product categories clearly, but these are 2 different ways to show results. The one on the left is just straight tabular format. On the right, we have some graphs coming into play, but lots of different ways to approach this. But these tend to all be PDFs, and I don't have a slide for this in here, but with Embodied Carbon, there are some new databases coming out that are tracking or are pulling the embodied carbon data out of EPDs and putting them into the database to make it a lot easier to find, to do the analysis and research to understand that impact. The biggest one right now is EC3, and that's the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator. That's put out by the Carbon Leadership Forum. And that's a really good database if you're looking for embodied carbon numbers for a bunch of building products. There's a lot of concrete mixes in there, but a lot of these other foreign products in different categories are included as well. So that's a really quick primer on LCA and EPDs. To wrap this section up, the big thing to note here is that a lot of times you might not be able to find the EPD right away, but just talking to the manufacturer about their impact and getting back to these numbers, just asking for the document, a lot of times you can get it really quickly. And I've got a slide on some of those topics here in a second. So then that brings us to material health. And I lump in material health and transparency because it is roughly the same thing. At least within this space. So what I've got on screen here is the back of a Coke can, right? Like we have an ingredient list that shows the different things that we're putting into our body. But do you know what is in the chair that you're sitting on? Do you know like what's in the carpet that you're standing on or crawling on? A lot of times, no. And then even if you did know what they were, is it harmful? Like for instance, here for the Coke can, we see phosphoric acid. Is that harmful? It says acid. Like, is that an issue? Clearly, like, I mean, I assume we've all drank a can of Coke or Diet Coke or something, and we're all still here, so it's not that bad. But what are the material health impacts of that? Some clever person came up with this concept about a decade ago now, and started to do this on the building product side of things, because a lot of times, because there were no restrictions or governance around the chemical usage. Going back far enough, and even today in a lot of industries, the requirement to the supplier was, I need something that's going to do this and it's going to work as best as possible. However you do it is on you, but it needs to do this. Okay. And that was fine for a long time, but then we realized that yes, some of these chemicals are problematic. A perfect example is asbestos. Asbestos was used in insulation for many, many years because it works well, and that there's no denying that. But it can cause mesothelioma, and so then it becomes a carcinogen, and now you have restrictions on its use here in the U.S. So we learn more by getting that data and having these studies on the toxicology of these chemicals. And that's a good thing, but we also know a lot about chemical hazards that aren't that bad, right? Asbestos is pretty clear. You breathe it in, you're probably going to get mesothelioma. But for some of these other ones, it's not as cut and dry, right? Like lead poisoning within paint is another good example. Like lead in very small quantities isn't isn't a super bad thing. I mean, it's still bad, but like once you start having, if there's lead in your water, that repeated dosage can build up, and that's where things become problematic. So the folks who created these documents and started to really push this in the building product space took what we call the precautionary principle. And the whole point there is risk assessment is difficult. Risk assessment meaning how are people exposed to this chemical? Are they exposed? In what dosage? That's a difficult thing to do. But a hazard-based approach, a precautionary principle, where you come in saying, if it's there, it could harm you. That's easy. That's binary. Yes or no. Is it there? So that precautionary principle is what's used across the material health and disclosure space in the building products nowadays. And I want to touch on what this looks like in practice a little bit. So this slide, I can spend an hour on this slide alone because there's a lot to this. But the big thing to point out is when you start talking about material health, you'll hear back from companies about some of these different disclosure programs. Declare, HPD, Green Screen, Cradle to Cradle, Living Product Challenge. There's a lot that comes into play here, but they're not equivalent. There are differences between them, and I'll make sure that Kim has this slide deck, so she can send this out to y'all, and you'll be able to refer back to this if you want. But there are differences, and they come back to what we have across the top here, which is inventory, screening, disclose, assessment, optimize. The first step is inventory, and that is so key. Another way to put it that I tend to talk about is know, disclose, assess, optimize. Know, KNOW. Because you can't disclose the chemicals in your product unless you know what's in your product. And let me tell you, most manufacturers don't know. And that's a scary thing. And that's something that I want to impart. If you take nothing else from this conversation, is most manufacturers don't know the chemicals that they're putting into their products, at least not down to any reasonable level. Like they get SDSs, safety data sheets, sure. Some of them are even good safety data sheets, but for the most part, they don't know down to a discrete level what is being put into their product. So a first step for us when we talk to these companies who ask us to help them create a declare label is to go get the data, go to the supply chain and say, okay, you're providing us this material, what's in it? And we go down to the 100 ppm level or 0.01% of the product. That is super detailed. And that is, it's a pain sometimes to get to that level of detail. But at the end of it, you're able to use that information for declare labels, HPDs, and so on. And that you end up with some of these documents, like a declare label, that is essentially what we saw with a Coke can, with just a list of ingredients on the back. You can create an HPD, which this is just the first page. It has that similar list, but pages 2 onward show the actual chemical hazards that are showing up with each one of those chemicals. So now you can see, is this why is this chemical harmful? Is it a carcinogen, a mutagen, and so on? So HPDs are good for that level of information. And then if you want to go even further, you can get Cradle Cradle certified or Living Product Challenge certified and take that next step through assessment, going through a full toxicology assessment, taking into account that risk that we skipped over earlier, and then working towards optimizing and creating better products. So there's a lot to this space for sure, but companies are starting to think about it, and as designers, like, you should be as well, because there's a lot at stake if we get it wrong, and that's something to really focus on there. So everything I've been talking about is on the product side of things. Switching over to buildings, and I'm trying to stay within the allotted time. Sorry for plowing through this. Jumping over to the building side of things, the 3 primary building certifications that we see in this space are LEED, Living Building Challenge, and WELL. You'll see something like net zero carbon or net zero energy certifications. Those are pretty straightforward. Net zero carbon is getting a little more complicated now, but we can discuss that offline if you'd like. But within each one of these, they are starting to incorporate some of these concepts. I put together this quick little graphic to show, because we've talked about product embodied carbon, talking life cycle assessment and EPDs. LEED V4 and V4.1 includes credits that buildings can achieve if you use products that have EPDs. And you can get extra credit if you use products that are showing reduction in their environmental impact, which is pretty awesome. At the building level, so if you take all of those individual product impacts, roll it up into a full building, you have what we call a whole building LCA. And this is what there are credits now within LEED that account for whole building LCA, or that give credit for full building LCA. And then on the Living Building Challenge side of things, in order to be net zero carbon, you need to not only offset your operational carbon, but you also need to offset your embodied carbon, and to truly achieve that net zero carbon side of things. So they're taking that into account as well. And then on the material health side, all 3 of them take that into account. WELL is kind of unique. It's the newest of all of these for sure, but they focus more on the wellness of the occupants rather than on the building itself. There are some credits in there about the building and the use of materials, hence material health impacts here, but a lot of it comes back to the wellness. So there are limited environmental impact concerns within the WELL standard, mainly because they are the common understanding is that WELL is kind of an add-on, if you will, to one of the other two. Most companies or most designers who end up going for WELL certification, it's LEED plus WELL or Living Building Challenge plus WELL. You have a few doing well on its own, but yeah. So Sheridan's asking like, which one do I like the most? That's a. I thought you were going to ask which one's most popular. The most popular is by far LEED, and the general concept with LEED is take the midpoint of everyone who's out there creating buildings and get the midpoint up a little bit. So in other words, incremental change, and that's fine. That's great. LEED has different levels, silver, gold, platinum, and it can focus on different aspects. Talking up, different things, but oh. Crap out of me every once in a while. Sorry. But yeah, you have that with LEED. Living Building Challenge says what's the best building and what does it take to get there, and that's great too. But it's very limited in the companies that can achieve it. So a lot don't even try. And then WELL being focused on the wellness aspect is something that's been missing in the market, and I think that's going to be really coming in big. So I think like from a like which do I like the most? They all have their own aspects of why you would go for one over the other, and I think they all have a place in the market. It's really just depending on the goal of the owner, the goal of the designer to on which one to choose to go for.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I kind of figured that you couldn't really pick a favorite, and just from the limited information that I have on the living building, it does seem a little unattainable.
Yeah.
And
yeah, very, very much so. With V4 coming out a couple years ago, they stripped out a lot of those super restrictions, I'll call them, to make it more attainable. So instead of saying you can't use any red list ingredient, 90% of the materials can't use a red list ingredient, and that really like has helped onboard more companies or more buildings, but it's still out there. It's a hefty lift. Which again, there's a place for that in the market. There are owners and designers who want to go all out and be the most sustainable building that they can be, and that's what that is. What it was designed for.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So to tie it back, and I'll roll through these fairly quick. I wanted to include it mainly for the PDF deliverable at the end, but what can you do? Like that's what this like boots on the ground. Like, yes, this is great. I now know more about this, but what can I do? I'm just in school still. I am going to be coming in as a junior designer or something. How can I actually implement some of this change? The first thing to know is that this space is pretty crazy. The amount of work and the amount of detail that comes into creating these documents is huge. There's a lot that goes into it. And on the flip side, there's a lot of impact that comes out of it on the other side. So you being right here in this middle, where that interaction between the designer and the manufacturer, in other words, that specification process, you are the most able to affect change out of really anyone in this supply chain here. And I say that honestly, because most of my clients come to us to get one of these documents created to start to even consider looking at their own impact because an architect or designer asked them for that information. They came in and said, okay, like the specification says thou shalt have an HPD. Okay, we gotta have an HPD. And then we start working with them, discover they have some problematic chemicals. They change their supply chain, they change the raw materials that they use. to remove that hazard, and now we have a better product that's being manufactured, all because someone decided to add that to a specification. So I've outlined 4 specific points. The first one is to require disclosure. That can be on the environmental impact side of things via EPDs. It can be on the material health side of things via HPDs or clear labels, but require disclosure in your specifications. Most of the companies that you're going to be working for are already doing this. But if they're not, definitely get them up to speed, because this is something that really affects change in the market. Start to specify low or zero carbon products. For the first time in a long time, or rather, first time ever, for like the first time ever, we are starting to see companies go to market with low or zero carbon products. So if you start to ask for it, they're going to start being able to provide that information, able to provide those products. So include those in your specifications, because companies are listening. Encourage certification. Like, disclosure is great, but take it that next step. Actually have someone come in behind you, look at your work, make sure that you're doing it right. And some of these certifications, namely Cradle to Cradle and Living Product Challenge, are hard to get. There's a lot that goes into it. So if they get it, that's pretty awesome. And they're really showing a good product that's going to market. So encourage them, maybe not specify against it, but at least include it as like a, hey, we prefer certification. Then the last one, which is the most important that we've already kind of touched on, is ask. Just ask. If you're not seeing the documents, if you're not seeing them have a certain certain thing related to material health or environmental impact or something, ask for it. You might not be the one who gets them to do it, but maybe there have been 9 other people who have asked for the same information, and you're the straw that breaks the camel's back to actually get them to do something. So ask, get them to listen to you, get them to really specify, or get them to understand that this is a concern for you as you design the products or buildings. Because manufacturers listen. They're always listening. So I've got 2 slides here on some quick resources that you can look into to follow up offline. First one, mindfulMATERIALS. This database is awesome. I'm sure you guys have gone on site to different architect and design firms and seen their libraries of materials and just been like in awe of all the different things that are included there. You likely, if you were looking close enough, saw this little mindfulMATERIALS sticker, or saw their label binder or an end cap on some of those binders in the library. And that's a physical representation of this online library. Strongly recommend you go and you sign up for an account to take a look, because this is a curated library. You have to have documentation in order to get into the mindfulMATERIALS library. And you can see it's separated off into different categories over here on the right, being human health, climate health, circularity, social something, I can't remember. And I can't remember what EH is either. Those 2 are future buckets that aren't really fleshed out yet. So we don't deal with them a lot. But it's a really easy way to sort and filter and find some products that have EPDs, that have declare labels, that have some of this documentation in place to be able to meet sustainability specs. So I strongly recommend going here. mindfulMATERIALS.com. There's a lot of good information on that site to get you set up, and then the library, it links to the library from there. The other one I wanted to point out, Parsons has their Healthy Materials Lab. And I know the guy who set up this website and set up or ran the Healthy Materials Lab for a while. his information, he's since left, but his information that he set up is insane. So one of the things that they have are online certificate programs, the online programs. There's a minimal cost to them, but trust me, they're really well done. There's a lot to it. It can really be a good primer on a lot of these topics. And then they also have within their tools and guides, their research area, these 6 different primers on these different categories. And they go into some detail around each one of them, what things you should be looking at as designers, what things you should be asking for, some of the buzzwords. Strongly recommend going there and taking a look around because there's a lot of good information that if you don't already know about it, I'm sure it'll be useful in your materials classes for sure. So that I know I hit right at just after noon, but as I said, I set aside time. Happy to continue to answer questions. Feel free to take yourself off mute if you want to ask, or put it in the chat and I'll see it and we'll go from there. So thank you for having me and for paying attention. No questions, really. I'm sure I just put everyone to sleep is what happened.
I think my connection's working enough where I can unmute myself. Thank you so much for everything that you just presented to us. I know it's a lot of material, especially for all of us that are not super familiar with what you do. And even knowing that you are a consultant on sustainability, like you mentioned, the number one question that you ask is, what does sustainability mean to you? Because otherwise you can't really help people. And I think that word really, I think you helped explain it on a more technical level, because I know right now I have a residential design class, and sustainability is a word that's being used, and especially since we're referencing well, but we are working with real life people. And so understanding the goals of the people that we're working for is really important. Do you have any advice for how a designer, or maybe how you have approached that in trying to find out more about a person's goals to help them identify a sustainable path?
Yeah, a lot of times, and I do this in interviews with potential candidates that work with us, is I'll just put the question back and just say, hey, how do you define sustainability? Because everyone's coming at it from a certain mindset. Now, granted, their mindset tends to change as I start to explain all the different facets, but they have something that in their mind, especially if they're saying, I want to make a greenhouse, I want to have a green space. They have something in their mind, and just leaving it open-ended like that allows them to really define it in their words, and they're not trying to put it in your buckets. Like for a while there, I would always talk about, I would start with the things that WAP does, say, okay, here's us, here's what I do, what I've done, what does sustainability mean to you? And then they try to just pick out a couple of those buckets that resonate with them, and that's fine. That can help the conversation, and I still have that in my back pocket if needed. But it's keeping it open ended has been fascinating, because you learn so much about the people, you learn so much about where they're coming from. And I mean, I was talking to my cousin who's on the call about sustainability, and like a couple months ago, and they immediately went down the social aspect, and talking about access and disability access and things like that, which honestly doesn't cross my mind when it comes to sustainability. And that was an eye-opening thing for me, and about what she is looking at and looking into, and how it's defined there. So it's leaving it open-ended, I think is super helpful, acknowledging the fact that that's a big question. So coming back and having some definitions to help help them in the conversation if they need to, or if they need it, is a good thing. But otherwise, open-ended is almost always the way to go.
Well, thank you. All right, if nobody else is going to ask a question, I have another one.
Yeah.
Because when we first chatted, you mentioned that your company has grown significantly since the pandemic.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a few theories and trends that you've noticed why this is happening. Do you think you could elaborate on those for the group?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, to Kim's question, we started the pandemic with 5 people. We had just hired number 6 in March of 2020, and she hadn't started yet. And then all hell broke loose. We went home, we left the office, and everything from there. And like I said earlier, now we're up to almost 20, which is crazy. And what's even crazier is a significant number of our clients were furloughed. They weren't able to go to work in a lot of cases. They weren't able to work with consultants or do stuff there. On the flip side, we got a bunch of new clients, a bunch of new things that came in, a little different in the either the type of product or the type of work, but a lot of that was because, I mean, first off, when everyone went and worked from home, they weren't able to go on site and do all the quote unquote fun things that come with going on site. So they sat down and dealt with paperwork, and that's what we do, is paperwork. So there's a lot of that occurred. The other thing that I mentioned that of course, there's no studies to back any of my guesses here, but one of the other things that I think happened is people were made aware of air pollution in a way that they hadn't been, and noise pollution and other things that they hadn't been in the past, right? Like, you heard stories early on in the pandemic of folks in LA and Beijing able to actually see across town because there was not the smog levels came way down. Less cars on the road and different things. You heard stories of birds coming back, and a lot more bird sounds that people were able to hear. Like, the studies there were showing that it wasn't actually more birds, but it was, you could hear it because you didn't have the traffic noise and different things. But people were starting to become more aware that we have an impact, that humans have an impact. And even if it wasn't a conscious thing, I think subconsciously people started to recognize that and have that as part of how they view the world now, which I think is a pretty, I don't know, maybe I'm just blowing smoke, but I think that makes sense there. And then the third one that I'm fairly confident is related, is Black Lives Matter, and all of the social justice that occurred during 2020. And while not directly related to environmental impact, material health impact, what Black Lives Matter and that movement and all the social justice things that happened that year, it forced companies to think about it, and see what, either implement plans to address it, diversity and inclusion impacts or different things. They had to respond to inquiries into things that were happening at the board level or whatnot. But companies started to think about ESG as a topic, environmental social governance, as a topic. And granted, the focus was on the social side because of that immediate need, but it also opened up that question of, wait a second, we were left with our pants down on the social side. Where else do we have gaps that we need to address? And a lot of them were starting to realize that they have significant gaps on the environmental side. And so for us, we saw a huge increase on the ESG offerings and our greenhouse gas inventory and climate risk offerings on the environmental side of things in 2020, 2021, that has just grown like crazy because companies are starting to look at this. You pair that with the fact that 2020 was a huge goal year for greenhouse gas emissions. Like companies would set 2020 goals to reduce impact by X%, whatever. And 2020 hit, and they're like, yeah, we didn't do anything. Like they started to look at it more and come up with a plan to continue to measure, continue to reduce, and set new goals. And so that all came into play. Let's see, another question from Sheridan. Do you see sustainability becoming more affordable? I think that sustainability is valuable, but clients don't often see its value beyond the price point. Great point. This is something that we deal with a decent amount in this space. The thing that I'll say is a lot of these companies are discovering that it's actually fairly simple to make some of these changes, to remove harmful chemicals, to reduce their impact or different things. And so they, just by doing the work to understand their impact, they're making things better. So even if it's not marketed as a greener product, as a lower impact product, they're working on it behind the scenes for sure. And the nice thing about that then is you're seeing less and less often a differentiator between a sustainable product and a non-sustainable product, at least within the same company. A good example of this is Mohawk Flooring. A few years ago, they came up with their EcoFlex NXT backing that was a PVC-free offering. And they put it out there, and it was a lower impact. And they started, they saw what happened with it in the market, and people wanted it. It got to the point where they there you go. It got to the point where they decided to just drop their PVC line, their ICT line, to just focus on the non-PVC option, because it wasn't any more expensive. It wasn't like the market was wanting it. And so they made that switch. So it is, I'm seeing fewer and fewer companies offer a sustainable option that's a higher price point and a non-sustainable option. And that gives me some hope there. That being said, when we start talking carbon and carbon offsets and net zero carbon products, that one's fairly new, and so companies are still tacking on a surcharge for that, and so that's something that is, we'll see how that changes, but that's definitely a good thing there. So I'll say yes-ish, that I think sustainability is definitely becoming more affordable because people are understanding it better. People are understanding the impacts, or the suppliers who are making harmful chemicals, who are supplying high carbon materials, are starting to get phased out in the market because they're not keeping up with the times. And so because of that, they are offering like more, quote unquote, more sustainable options, and dropping their other options. So companies are being forced, quote unquote, into offering more sustainable products, which is not a bad thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question that I'm just curious on your opinion. Thinking about how large companies were looking internally to see where they had gaps. I think we can all do that as individuals as well. And I know something that students will often do is an online carbon footprint or those little tests that you can do online, and it
Mhm.
asks you, do you commute to work, do you eat meat, all that stuff. Do you think those are an effective, when you get the results, do you think they're effective, or do you think that it's more of a tool to just get people understanding a little bit more about impacts?
In my experience, I again, I go back to know, disclose, assess, optimize as a cyclical process, right? Like the first step is knowledge. If you don't know your impact and where it's coming from, you can't do anything about it. Like for these companies, disclosure is the next thing to say where you are, assess, do that deeper dive to figure out exactly where the impacts are, learn more about it, then optimize, which means you're changing something. So then you got to go back to know and start the process over again. And so in my experience, that knowledge step is the biggest change maker that I see out there, because just knowing that your primary impact is, say, eating meat, maybe that causes you to switch to chicken for 1-2 meals a week. Maybe that forces you to, or that you start to think, well, maybe I can do a vegetarian meal or a vegetarian dinner once a week. And I'll say personally on that one in particular, which, by the way, meat as an individual, red meat is one of the biggest impacts from an individual perspective. But my wife went vegetarian, probably 10 years ago now. And because of that, like we don't cook meat meals at home, which is fine. I still eat meat when I go out or different things, but it's taken my, like, every lunch, every dinner, having meat down to 2-3 times a week. So it really has reduced that. And I'll tell you from personal experience, not a big deal. And then from my mother-in-law, like we have her over with her boyfriend, and they have dinner with us, which of course again is meatless, is a vegetarian meal. And at first they were just, but after a few times they're like, shit, this is good. And so now, like, we've got them doing vegetarian meals 2-3 times a week to replace that. And it's just knowing that eating meat as your primary impact can start to make changes. So I do think that those carbon calculators, assuming that there's data, the correct data behind it, assuming that the results that they give you are in such a way that you can see it's not just my impact is 1,000. It's no, my impact is 1,000, and 900 of it is because of eating meat. Getting to that level of detail is incredibly powerful, and that's what most of us in this space refer to as like a hotspot analysis. Knowing where your hotspots are in any impact across the board allows you to do something about it, and that's incredibly powerful. And honestly, it's one of the reasons why I love this job, because, like, if I go to my, like, convincing my mother-in-law and her boyfriend to do, or to go vegetarian for a couple meals a week, like, that's awesome from a personal level and like an emotional level, have that experience. But if I can point out an environmental hotspot to a $10-20 billion company and they make a change, that's pretty cool. So it's awesome to be able to go back and provide some of these results to get them, or so that way they understand where they can make an impact and where they can make a change, and what I refer to as actionable results. I always work with our newer consultants internally to think about that term is like, is what you're presenting actionable, right? Like, telling them what their impact is one thing, but providing them something that they can, the results in such a way that they can do something with it, that's where change starts to happen. And I think that, like, to answer your question, I think it is powerful, it is useful if it's actionable. And that's a big if. I've seen some of those calculators out there, and they're, whew, they're fun, but some of them are pretty good. And yeah.
Just because I'm not really familiar with your line of work, really, who do you typically consult for? Is it typically manufacturers? Is it clients?
Yeah, so the majority of the for the clients who come to us for the stuff that we talked about today, we're talking life cycle assessment, body carbon, or material health. The vast majority of those clients are manufacturers. Most of them are within the building product space. So we're talking ceiling tiles, flooring, wallboard, furniture. But on my client list, and it's pretty crazy. But just building products across the board. That is the vast majority of that space. Recently getting into this ESG work and greenhouse gas inventories, that has expanded out to include financial institutions, venture capital firms who have a portfolio of companies that they own. They're looking for the greenhouse gas inventory for their portfolio. And so we work with, man, we've got some interesting clients because of that work. But we've done some work with large retailers. We've done work with an insurance company, clothing brands. Like we've done some work with carters, with track bikes. Yeah, I'm trying to remember which ones I can talk about and can't. So that's always the fun job as a consultant, is where does the NDA start and stop? But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We have a lot, like, what was the number? We have direct to CEO influence at $100 billion worth of companies. Yeah, something like that, which is pretty insane. It's pretty cool to think through that. And some of the Fortune 100 companies that we work with, especially as a tiny company that we are, it's fun to come in there. It's very intimidating, but it's fun to come in and have those conversations to get them to think about it. And for the clients that are already thinking about it, they do care. We're able to come in and be that workhorse, that data provider, to give them the numbers that they so desperately need to be able to talk about their savings, to be able to talk about their impact. And that's also, for me, being a data nerd, I love that piece of it, because it's like, it's there. Like, I know what you want to do, and I know I can get you there. It's just got to get to the data, that we can start talking about it.
Very, very cool. Thank you.
Yep.
Do you get a lot of college students wanting to do internships with you?
We've had a couple requests over the years, but we've been small enough that we haven't been able to do that. So I don't know if that's going to change in the future. But if so, then I'll definitely reach back out. But I do know that a lot of these architect and design firms that want to work on this material health stuff, or this environmental impact, they can't afford the time to do it. They have everything else that is happening, and this type of thing is just an extra thing to add to someone's plate, and they're like, not me. And if enough people say not me, then it doesn't get done. So as an intern, if you're looking to work with one of these design firms, architecture firms, I would definitely, if you get an opportunity to write a cover letter, or to get in for an interview, and you are interested in this material selection and sustainable material selection, mention that, like, unsolicited, mention that, because guaranteed they have work that you could do there. If you're interested, they will do it. A weird stat that I like, within Living Building Challenge, before the current version, you couldn't use any red list ingredients. at all. So every material that was used, they had to find and document that it wasn't, or they had to find a product that didn't use redless ingredients and have documentation to prove that. It's getting better with databases nowadays, like mindfulMATERIALS, to find that info. But before, that was hard, to the point where every single material on average would take about 2 to 3 man hours to get that documentation in line. And if you're talking a building or a space, 2 to 3 hours per material, that's a lot. That adds up very quickly. So doing that research, they have teams dedicated to that. They have material specialists now that focus on that, and coming in with that understanding of this space, understanding of these libraries like mindfulMATERIALS, or some of the or having a certificate like the Parsons certificate, like, is definitely something that'll give you a leg up for sure, and eventually be the thing that gets you in the door for an internship. Granted, that'll be what you're working on that summer, but it's definitely, if you're interested in it, there's a lot of work out there for this.
Well, thank you so much, Matt. I know we're in the last 4 minutes of your time block, so I really appreciate, and also you putting up with all the technical difficulties at the beginning. Western's not known for having a good internet connection, so yeah, thank you so much for everything. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.